Every state after that, every state at Windy, all the way up.
Shout out to.
You know, go out to West Texas.
Out in cyberspace. Now.
3 megawatt. I know they're G, but I don't think so. At least 2 megawatt.
Yeah, you say hello and see me.
Hello, is there anybody out there in cyberspace?
Douglas Yezel.
All right, take.
We're gonna, that's all we're gonna do, just a short presentation thing, maybe.
Okay, welcome to the October 2024 meeting of the Houston Electric Vehicle Association. Tonight we have a guest speaker, Sol Bobst, and he will explain to us about the dynamics of commercial solar farms, if that's correct, and the intricacies of that, and so forth, the economics and the technical jargon of it as well. I'd just like to welcome you here, and I guess we can get going.
Yeah, and we're gonna look at past events.
Past events, okay. We had the Drive Electric Month at Houston Botanical Garden, and a lot of people brought their vehicles out there for show and tell. Myself and the president, Dave Hansen, were radio stars at 90.1 KFPT. The recording is on our Facebook page if you'd like to take a listen. And a lot of it, the theme was disruptions and how EVs will disrupt not only the transportation market, but other things as well. And we also have, we're radio stars, and then we had a meeting at 1940 Wheels and Wings at the old Houston Airport building, not far from Hobby. And so we had the best of the old and best of the new being EVs, and then some of the old being the old time airline memorabilia and some old aircraft. So it was a good experience there. So second one. Yeah. And then this is coming up, Austin Circuit of the Americas. I've been to 2 of them before, and it's very interesting. You get to actually drive EVs, some of what the major manufacturers are offering, and so that's good. There's also have a lot of EV skateboards, EV motorcycles, EV bikes, and then with a little bit of renewable energy thrown in as well. And then one of our members, Robert Powell, he actually drove on the circuit.
I did too. Yeah.
On an ICE car, I believe, but
no, I did it in a Model Y.
Model Y. Okay.
Yeah, they didn't let you go more than 60, but what the heck, it was still fun. Now, also last year they had a large aftermarket and modders and all this beautiful cars out there, of course, that people are playing with. And also they had a 1400 horsepower Mustang Mach-E on the scratch pad, destroying tires. And you could ride in one, they put you in a car with a Mach-E with a driver, and they would do that with you. So it's grown a lot in the last 5 years, I guess it's been going.
I've been to 2 of them, so I highly recommend it. And if you're interested, maybe you could have like a
yeah, a Mustang Mach-E. Yeah, and they're just shredding tires.
so
But
maybe if you're interested, maybe you could just let us know and that people could arrange a carpool out there and make it a day trip.
Yeah, at least meet up for maybe a dinner. Let's see. Okay,
Uh,
this is what's coming up.
this is coming up and we're also gonna have our in December, the holiday party. So we haven't decided if the venue yet. I suggested one place, but if anybody has any other ideas, the last few ones were at Katz's on Westheimer, and there's two of them. So the newer one, and we've had some things at Abdullah's and other places, and it just for social hour, just place to go have like a beer and a hamburger someplace and talk EVs and perhaps just ride it and maybe just max out on speed and
We're just thinking about playing around with
Playing
yeah,
around with EVs.
yeah.
so it's what a toy to play with.
Mhm.
So and
A little ad for the national.
yeah, about join the EV. We're part of a larger uh organization. It used to be the Electric Auto Association. Now it's the Electrical Vehicle Association, and we've kind of tweaked our name just to get in line with that. And there's a lot of benefits. You can get some discounts on certain things, and it's just a wealth of information. And recently I've been reaching out to some of the other chapters and uh sending them articles about things within their locality and there's been chapter heads that have given talks here before, so a lot of cross pollination. So and we have the EV1 sheet. It's like a little snapshot from the what Dale used to call the mother church, the national chapter about various EVs, and we're brand neutral. We have some people that drive Teslas. I have a Bolt, and other people have Kias and so forth, and Mach-E's, and there's one that even rides EV motorcycles. So we're not promoting any one vehicle. As long as it has a plug, we're all for it. And we have some business cards that Cullen has that you can just give out to people. I call it evangelize. It's okay. Here's who we are, and then here's some good sites on the back, and so it's very good. Opportunities. I can't read it.
Yeah, we need we're God forbid I'm the webmaster, so that's scary.
Not really. He does a lot on our Facebook page. If you go to our website, HoustonEV.com, .org,
HoustonEVA.org. Yeah.
HoustonEVA.org, and it has the links to our Facebook page, which has a potpourri of all things EVs, aircraft, watercraft, personal vehicles, working vehicles. And we also have a YouTube. If you miss a meeting, you don't really have to miss a meeting. You just go to some past meetings and just pull it up and see what's going on. And
We can use some somebody younger than like 60 to help with us. And then you're e-bus lobbying.
well, I'm trying to get a hold of the people at the Texas Electric School Bus Project. It's oneword.org, and they are lobbying the various school districts across Texas to go EV with EV buses. And Colin and I actually went out to what is it, Cypress Fairbanks School District, and they had a little meeting there, and then we got to ride in an electric school bus, and he actually drove
I
one.
got one.
So anyways, and it's really quiet, and it's just you can hear yourself talk, and they say it's going to be better for the kids because they don't have to scream over it, over a dirty diesel engine. So I'm trying to get with them, and then maybe we could team up, and then maybe members of the HEVA could do some of the grunt work, some of like the what they would call in direct marketing, cold calling, cold reception, and then they could perhaps deputize us, and we could be full members, and we could just talk the talk with some training, and I would imagine it's all on web-based where they send out information, receive information from the web. But I'll have to get back to that. Candidates, okay. Dave and I have been the officers for the long time, and then Colin of communications and websites. And I was just putting it out there if maybe somebody might want to step up. It's a very good, it's not all that hard, and I'm not necessarily doing any more work than what I did without a title, but if some people would like to step up and maybe we could have elections next year in January and see maybe fresh blood might help. And I know at one time there was a legacy people like they were just almost president, vice president for life, and then somebody made mention of it, and then we had elections, and then we had Kevin Douglas as our president for a while, and then now Dave and I are president, vice president respectively. And so if just anybody ideas on that, if somebody wants to step up, you just communicate with us through our email address, and we could go from there.
And the EV education STEM thing is, we went to HCC Automotive once, and we're trying to encourage education in the EV area. And we didn't go any further than that, but there's some opportunity there. We can support somebody who's up for it.
Yeah, and if anybody has like any projects and anything that they're doing EV related or renewable energy related that might want to give a talk, we're welcome to talk among ourselves too. And if you know anybody either from another chapter, from a business agency or something that deals with EVs, reach out to them, and then they could give a talk possibly if they choose to. And
The Tesla installer contractors who did are doing home share at my house to install that, and he's going to show up in November, and I wouldn't want just anybody, but I think you'll have some really interesting stories. Yeah.
I thought they were getting away from the actual installation now that they're
Oh, it's all contractors.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, it's all
certified, okay.
contractors. Yeah.
certified contractors. All right. So welcome to, like I said, again, October 2024 meeting, how time flies. And so I guess without further ado, we could hand it over to our guest speaker. So
Yeah, he's probably gonna come.
you're gonna have to come over here. All right.
Thank you.
Right.
If I can arrange my desktop here.
Where's Dave? Is he in Europe? Italy.
In Italy, yeah. His wife was at some kind of NASA conference. He's tagging along.
Get labeled for that.
Nah.
Bellissimo, bellissimo.
All right, can you see the screen and hear me okay? Great. Well, thanks for Colin for inviting me. And then also, 4 years ago, I was, talked with Dave and talked then. So if you were around then, I hope you enjoy some of the updates. And if you're new to this, I hope you enjoy it as well. And I'm happy to take questions if you see anything in the Q&A and want to stop me to ask anything either online or either here in the room. I love interaction and work. Gives me an idea what you're thinking about and talking. So look forward to that, and glad to sign up and also be a part of this group. Some of my own personal story right now is I have a goal and aspire to own an EV. My personal journey this past year was so I had a lease on a more conventional pickup truck that was turning over and went from 2020 to then this summer. So this summer I had to make a decision, and with the great issues of interest rates and turning over, I decided to turn my lease over to purchase and basically keep my monthly payment within what I've been used to budget wise. And so I'll pay off my truck in 3 years. And so what's at least the interesting timing with that is, besides the Cybertruck, there's the Silverado, as well as maybe the Lightning if that comes out. And so as Rivian, yeah. So as those are probably also, when I've leased on my business, something that is pre-owned is okay for me and my own work. But like I live currently in a condo, and then my girlfriend has a house out in suburbia. So my condo building has said, well, all right, for no one has been the first one in my condo building yet. And I've been the one asking the most. So they said, well, all right, we've talked to a company initially, and their quote is for the installation around $5,000. And so probably the tax credits would be a part of that, right? But I'm in a condo building, I pay HOA fees. Part of that's my own electricity. And I know I'm also going to get some sort of electricity bill probably, because they're not going to just give that to me. But at the same time, I want to know, okay, what's going to be their impact on dropping that line for me, how, and others. So I'm still waiting for them to say how it'll all work, because if I say, okay, I'm buying this, and then I wait and try and do the connection without them figuring all that stuff, it could be a real mess for months. But I really want to, continue to learn from this group, because I intend for my next vehicle to be a practical EV and also kind of pickup truck. So I look forward to learning from all of you about that at the basic level. Just a general disclaimer, you can put this on your YouTube channel or group if you want, but just generally, I'm referencing some resources and other things that are public, and anytime you put anything out on public, this is for informational and educational purposes. And I'm going to talk about part of the reality of growth and adoption is also changing an electric utility model that is over 100 years old and it's dated, all right? But part of talking about that and how things work and what can happen if we don't change may say, there's ways that things work and not. So I just don't want to be quoted out of context or said I said something that I didn't say. And there's a lot of people that make better graphics than me. So I reference everything the best I can, and all the holders of copyright that I have get credit to that, so no one sues me. I'll talk, and I have updated this from 4 years ago, of the current state of utility scale solar in US and Texas. So I have a consulting business in the health and safety area, or toxicology, where I worked in the chemical and oil and gas business, and that's a business I have. But I've worked on developing solar projects and also utility battery storage now. Since 2016, I helped bring in capital partners for a small project of a couple of megawatts of solar PV and then a megawatt of battery storage. And that project is selling its power to the city of Smithville near Austin, Texas. So glad to have seen that. And I represent over a portfolio of several landowners looking at solar and storage, and happy to trying to negotiate those projects and work. So I'll try and go through this quickly, just to give a bit of background about what's the state of power and work specifically in the state, a little bit how ERCOT works, why this is important to the project and how it's viable. You know, I had some good questions about, you know, what's the difference with commercial rooftop and C&I versus grid. All of what I talk about is grid tie and selling to that. So like a company like a big box store can create a lot of savings with upfront CapEx costs and lowering their fixed cost by installing some renewable infrastructure and work. But as far as these larger projects, we're really looking for customers to buy the power privately in the ERCOT market, which is kind of unique in the US for those private agreements to purchase the power. And then also we have a lot of growth in utility scale battery storage, and ERCOT buys that directly to keep our lights on when we have some of the power emergencies. So I'll talk a bit about this market, and then I'm trying my best to address some of the things you think about in the EV market. If you're already an electrical engineer and you know about these things, then please be patient with me. But if you're new to this, then I'll talk to you about the duck curve, and or I'll call it, it's kind of like when you were a kid in high school or junior high, maybe playing opposite day, and what that really means and what this means for future adoption. And I'll talk about some resources may be helpful for advocacy and other work. So the point of these graphs and resources is the light blue in both of them show that utility scale solar will continue to grow and have fast adoption as a portion of power. You know, wind energy started in the 90s and has its middle area of cost. So there's the interest in the sustainability of the energy, but there's also some basic economics. The root cost of building for solar PV installations somewhere in the $25 per megawatt hour type cost, and natural gas turbine generation, although it's still the very big base of what we have, building those is about twice that amount. So you have, you know, interest in sustainability, but you have economics. It's faster and cheaper to build this type of work, and Texas continues to be one of the fastest growing markets. You know, our comptroller within the state, although we deal with some, you know, there's all the things that are part of our power mix and work, but they recognize at the state website the jobs and contribution to the GDP, as well as local stories on, you know, $27 billion in the fourth quarter last year of investment, and already 6.5 gigawatts were installed last year. So it's a big part of our proportion of power, and I'll tell you a little bit about the balance of power in ERCOT soon. So in this graph, it showed just how it was also growing specifically over the state, but at the, although it's down here, I guess where you necessarily can't see, they talk about 106 gigawatt project powering, there we go, thank you, 12,170 homes. So, you know, if you had a megawatt can fit on about 5 acres or 2.5 football fields worth of land. And, you know, generally the breakdown, I recently looked at my girlfriend's house bill for the month, and it was 1,500 kilowatts. So just kind of showing that kind of math, 1 kilowatt could power, you know, if that was an average 667 homes, that's somewhat close to the 760 power. Generations probably changed a bit, or demand in from houses is different, but you know, you can deliver a lot to the grid for a relatively minor footprint to land for building solar. So these were just some of the past highlights just to show the importance of it and also some of the ongoing demands. We have the coal plants in our state that make up almost a quarter of the power generation now will be retiring and not operating by the end of the decade. So we have, and right now our total load in the state is somewhere between 80 to 90 gigawatts. There's prediction models for up to 2035 that that's going to double, maybe to 150 by 2035. We have the growing population. It's very popular for data mines, either servers or crypto miners to come to the state because of the friendly business environment, all kind economic growth, et cetera. So the need and the demand is not going away. Now, I'll tell you one of the challenges in my business and work is that there's ERCOT is a little bit of a side, but important to talk about. ERCOT is charged, it's quasi-government, but it's separate from the Public Utility Commission, but they're basically charged, and get calls from the governor's office to say, keep the lights on now, especially right after a major storm. People want, them to function to keep power going. So although they've done some great studies on the future and there is future planning, they're looking at what are their immediate needs to keep the grid from crashing and dealing with the minor reserves we have. So what's great about distributed size projects are under 10 megawatts, which still can power thousands of homes or be close to a source, is that at a medium-sized project like that, you're dealing mostly with the transmission company and not a whole lot of regulatory or government approvals to get something built. It can be done in about 2 years and close to a source and really fill a local need. But a lot of the large projects, may take ERCOT studying 2 or 3 years to decide at 100 megawatts or larger, okay, if you've got 10 or 12 of those, what makes sense for what is currently built now? So a lot of the huge projects that are proposed in the state don't get built because if you have a $150 million project and the investors have a certain target, they wait 3 years and then they're told, well, you can build this now, but you get to pay for this extra $25 million substation that we need to put there to keep it working, or you can wait 6 years until we add the infrastructure there to fit what's there, all right? So if the investors had a lot of different projects they were doing and they can just write it off if they're not going to make their target, then that kind of project goes away. So what I do is I like things at the distributed level, kind of close to where there's demand, and you'll see that I think the future of power grids is going to be more distributed. We'll talk about that later. But I would rather do something smaller now that I know I can build and then try larger later than wait a long time for a big gamble. And so those are some of the issues with, as you see our state struggle with the power and infrastructure plan, some of the things that'll happen. There are our last legislature to try and deal with some of the challenges created a subsidized loan at around, say, 3% to build more natural gas turbines or peaker plants. The challenge with those is still the equipment to build those things, even if they got the funding, has a 2 or 3 year backlog as well. So there's a lot of issues that go into how power is demanded and worked. But this was although it's a little dated, it's still a good study that shows the difference and the changes in the pie and the work. You see coal here as the orange going to 2031, and the orange in that graph is at least sliced in half, if not more. And then solar is the dark blue, and it really grows down there on the bottom. So they've predicted, because of the economics and the capacity and the needs, solar to be a very large part of this growth. Wind stays about the same. You know, we have a couple of nuclear plants in the state, but those are very challenging regulatory to build more. We might see more, but it's a lot of work. And so we have a little bit of hydro and et cetera. So there are projects viable all over the state, and some of this picture has been changing, but initially in the 2010s eras, a lot were built close to where the higher radiation is. And you see this kind of by the larger maps where those things are. And but there's less larger ones, say, close to the Texas population triangle. And so this is where, you know, initially there was a lot of interest in, yes, getting the best radiation and output from solar panels and PV from the generation. But what also makes projects viable almost anywhere in the state is this heat map shows where most of the demand is. So initially, when a lot of projects were built out in West Texas, it kind of saturated the highways. Think of a lot of traffic coming from, you know, west of Ozona, trying to get to Houston and Dallas, and it's thousands of cars every day, especially if you then got a very windy, sunny day. Those lines can be congested, and most of this power demand is, you know, very high, obviously in our Houston area. There was some hydro over there in East Texas. So this is heat zone mapping for the pricing. So although there might be less radiation out here in the Texas Triangle, there's a higher demand, higher pricing you can get. And so that's why projects can be viable all across the state. You know, the state is mostly ERCOT as it's shaded in here. To the east, we have what's called MISO, and then to the west, near El Paso, there's the western grid, and then the panhandles in what's called the Southwest Power Pool. And all of them kind of have a little different approach to large projects, but ERCOT's kind of unique. So hopefully those maps gave you the idea that location is important depending on what's a factor for your project. And then obviously having, besides, say, you know, flat cleared agricultural land that's ready to go, infrastructure of being within 3 to 5 miles of a substation, or at least really good power lines. Power lines pretty much over the property, either at distribution or transmission level. A 6 to 9 kilovolt, or what I would call the telephone pole looking like power lines that are distribution. Those are upwards of 200,000 now, I think 150 to 200,000 a mile to build. And then transmission at 138 or 345, what we'd call the towers, are around $1 million a mile. So, you know, land that's either not directly over it or more than a few miles away impacts the project costs and margins. So the only thing missing from this type of thing is obviously a big battery storage, but you have all these things, the direct current coming into an inverter, transformer if you need it, potentially a battery if we imagine one, and then selling and interacting that with the grid. Here's examples of what's called single axis, or tilting that's following the ecliptic and angle of the sun all day. There are some ground mounts or sometimes fixed mount, depending on where these are, but it's pretty usually economical and best production with single axis. If you drive around the loop on San Antonio, you can see what was built 15 years ago in the early ages with CPS. They have some dual axis operators there in the San Antonio area. Those, a lot, you don't see a whole lot of those because the two axes and servos and the maintenance on those versus the extra output, aren't as cost efficient as, say, usually a single axis. These are just different examples of layouts, mostly flat, and then having, proximity to that substation. So you can fit, it says 8, if you have really flat and land to spare, 8 acres can be designed, but it can really be done in 3 to 5. And, you consider all those things. So like I said, you have, if you think of these levels of just like your street to street type of driveways, and then your city roads, and then getting onto the highways and the interstate. All right. So this is where ERCOT is managing all the power requirements and traffic, and making sure that, if this highway is full, then you got to get around it to get to another place, or make sure there's issues. And there's been some updates to that substation, depending on how large, can be up in price too. So here's an example, one of my sites. This is an older 3-phase 69 kilovolt over some pasture. This is 138 kilovolt transmission lines. Next, kind of going right parallel to a pipeline. This is in the Bryan College Station area, so close to the load zone, and that was about 3 miles from a substation. This property has a substation on it, and it's West Texas, out by Reeves, but it's got some great infrastructure, and this was cleared cow pasture that could be great higher elevation. It's viable to do something with some slope and brush to clear, but that adds to some cost, and there's obviously other infrastructure that can surround. The other interesting thing that's, a concern for a lot of landowners I talk to is if they have an ag exemption, they want to keep it and keep their taxes low. And so they're concerned about their tax impact if they have a large commercial operation on it. So the taxes for the commercial operation goes to the commercial owner, not for them, but they could lose their exemption on the underlying land if they're no longer doing agriculture. So the field of agrivoltaics is interesting, where you'll see a lot of sheep herding for grazing to be the lawnmowers, and keep that maintenance cost, so you could rotate those in and out, and work with the county ag office and like Texas A&M Ag Extension to see what's the minimum amount you could have there. Also, bees and honeybees are another option that people explore. I got to talk to some Department of Energy fellows that have worked with cattle more. There's been more history of them working with cattle on the dairy side, and say having covers for them, but they I think started a program called the Lasso Project, where they are now trying to do seed money to fund solar around some grazing areas. And obviously you have to overbuild a bit to deal with a 1 or 2 ton animal rubbing against the infrastructure. But, it is being explored. So agrivoltaics is kind of a fun thing to think about and share with others as concerns. Obviously, another concern of landowners is reclamation. The project may be bought and sold several times over the course of a long lease. So, they want to know that whoever owns it's going to return the land back to a state when the project comes to an end of life cycle. People always ask the questions like, well, no one's fully necessarily gotten to that full level yet, but part of those contract things, if you have land or someone, is that They should open an escrow account, have some money in that, so that would either cover the cost of removal or salvage if somebody went belly up, et cetera. So those are all kind of common things. My biggest challenge, I know landowners, I know tax equity that's interested in the tax benefits from owning or doing the major capital, but the upfront capital to propose a project and get it can average 300 to 500K per project. So the one of the biggest costs is the interconnection study with the transmission company, or basically the pay to play. So you're going to say, we're going to build something and you're going to make money and we're going to make money. So you have to pay for them to study it, get their time, and come to that understanding. So I spend a lot of my time educating investors that aren't familiar with Texas or others how that could work and do those things. And fortunately, I'm talking to 3 or 5 parties at once right now. I had a good trade show this September, and everyone's planning their 2025 money. So knock on, I'll pretend that's wood and not veneer. Hopefully it's wood, knock on wood for that. So most of the pricing deals with per acre per year. There could be royalties given. Usually you can work around most issues with with mineral rights. Oil or gas is underground, soil's up here. They can directionally drill or have right of way and deal with those issues. But there's a lot of project management and diligence to getting something built, and several steps to go through. These may be dated, but it's just an example of, so the other thing that's interesting, because the price, the wholesale price of power in Texas is around 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, mostly driven by natural gas being the base of most of our power. So when people are used to pricing in California or Massachusetts and they come to Texas, people come to me and say, will we get a double-digit IRR return on a project? And like, maybe 8 to 10% is pretty reasonable. But if they're looking for stock market type returns in a commodity energy market, that's not how the need is. But there's a sheer scale of need for the power and work that, things will be built. So, I keep looking for the partners that understand that and have the long-term type view to fuel those needs. But like anything, business has a lot of competing interests when they make decisions, right? So solar and storage are also an important part of this market. This link is up to 0.5 gigawatt now of battery storage that's being left. What's really interesting is learning the new technologies really now being rolled out. Lithium phosphate's been the most common one in large, but sometimes some communities may be concerned about if there's a fire risk or a hazard risk with having something installed. The management of these projects have improved a lot, and I think there's a lot of good plans, but there's also other technologies now, redox, gravity flow, all kinds of different battery technologies just besides lithium technology that are part of the options that can be considered. So I really welcome that. And I think solar and storage make sense together. We have batteries anywhere from half an hour to 4 hours at a large project that can feed the grid. And when we get into the grid design, we'll talk about the importance of that with demand. Yes.
Half an hour to 4 hours. But can that be compared to anything that is, say you got a solar farm with battery storage? I mean, is that half to 4 hours? Or is that just, I kind of can't wrap my mind around it.
Great question. So one of the reasons batteries is growing so much and very popular is when we have the power emergencies and, storms and imminent brownouts, ERCOT, basically the government will pay $2,500 a megawatt hour, or, instead of the market being 5 or 10 cents a kilowatt, they're paying 25 cents when that demand is there for the emergency. All right. So that's profitable when that happens.
So that's driving the addition of large-scale battery farms?
Yes, it is, because they know that there's demand that comes from the state. Now, the problem that comes with financing or modeling or where to put it is, a financer or somebody, if you're going to do a big loan, the construction is going to say, well, how do I know I'm going to underwrite this and where? And the answer is, well, we know that emergencies are going to happen, but we don't know when. And so then when there isn't an emergency, if it's not tied to solar and just sitting there together, it has to be doing some cycling. So you're going to pull and pay when you're pulling, and then you're going to demand it out at a certain level. And I mean, you might have an above margin of, buying low and selling high when you can, but that's just kind of trading and not something you want to build an entire thing on. So it makes sense to have generative solar PV with a battery, in that, yeah, you're making the best of the battery when you need it, but you're also selling the generative stuff, or you're storing into the battery if the pricing's down that. So it makes sense to me to have both. I'm willing to do projects either way, but we need more than just a bunch of profitable battery systems. And we'll get into that when we get into the duck curve and some of those issues. Okay. But good question. So we definitely need all the tools to make a future smart grid and EV infrastructure available to us. And we have to think about it. And so, I'll do battery projects, but I think generative renewables as well as the battery should go together. So this is a fascinating rabbit hole. If I ever get to a point where I can research things and invest in neat technologies, I think you can have a lot of fun in the battery space. And then obviously at a local to source area, there's also potential future of having self-contained things where a local grid has everything it has to need and supply. We're taking steps towards that to really work on close to load and demand areas. All right. So that gives you a little bit of background of, solar will continue to be an important addition to the grid, and it is very feasible to build. I'm very happy to be in this space, but it has its own challenges and awareness and advocacy that people need to understand to make the project successful. So tied to that is the whole success of the grid we all fall into. And so for anything that can have a large load, like an electric vehicle or several of them at one time, we have to start then thinking about, how do we bring a model of power from the 1880s, 1920s to a modern day issue and work. And so with that, we really have to look at what I'll call the duck curve, or it's like the opposite day problem. All right. So if bear with me if you're already familiar with this and know it in your sleep. But if you don't know it, then the duck curve basically deals with how we live and structure our lives. So you start your day, and you maybe run your coffee machine, turn down your air, depending on what climate you're in. Maybe you keep it pumped in your house, but you do these things, but then minimize what your power needs are when you leave the house for the day and go out and do your daily activities. So we have this progression of the day on this chart, and sun when it's out there, but the home load is decreasing, and we have this basically threefold difference. But when everyone goes home, you're going home from rush hour or you're done for the generation. And then at your home, you run home, you run your dishwasher, you run your washing machine, you maybe plug in your one or two electric vehicles, and you continue to do things until you drop off for the next day and start that cycle again. So this differential of when power is available and when it's demanded the most continues to increase year over year. And so when there's a threefold difference in power load within a 6-hour period, that's a tremendous stress on a grid and a lot of operational issues that can change. So this is talking about just that concept, or imagining, when you're plugging in your car. It's, I'll get to it, maybe not show it directly, but like the Texas Comptroller website says, best time to charge your EV vehicle is between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. every day. But if you're probably out doing your things, unless you work from home doing that. So there's the same idea of, what's when the demand is in work. And so this is something that came out of then the state of California, where they're talking about the challenge or the more dramatic changes in the duck curve year over year. And so they add to this the lower demand, but also the lower demand is when we're having the most generation of the solar when it's not needed, and then the solar is not as available. And maybe if you have wind infrastructure, the wind blows more at night, but the peak load that happens in the evening or when people need to regenerate is where there's a lot of concern for the grid stability. So this doesn't show as dramatic of a change, but still it gets at to what stresses the load and opportunity. So this was, then this gets into, we have this change problem, but we also have some very aggressive governments and legislation across places. This was a dissertation from a student that looked at EV infrastructure work in 2019 out of Ohio State. And, says lower adoption. These were probably updated since then, but you have some European countries, looking to completely change everything by 2035. We know the state of California wants to go 100% around those times as well. So we have some very aggressive legislation and then other things. Now, here's where I kind of curious to get feedback from others. This talked about the different alternating current levels and ranges that demand can be on the market. So it talks about, charging anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to basically all night if you were just on a regular 120 type work. So, then depending on where you live, or I suppose how well you're juicing things, I don't know, is this something you as a club kind of talk about a lot, is how maybe if you're in a different neighborhood or place, how long it takes to charge, or if you're at a different charging location, what the feeding is? I mean, that can depend on a car or the health of the battery, but I'm just kind of curious. I thought this figure was interesting about a wide range of load or times on loads and how that can also add to
I can't speak
grid
for anyone else,
mathematics.
but range is going up and up and up and up, right? I used to have a vehicle that would only go 70 miles, and I had to work at making sure I got home, right? But now that I have a vehicle with more range, it's less of a problem. And I think the problem's going away because EV ranges are going up. I don't know what y'all's thoughts on that are, but,
Infrastructure spreading,
huh?
infrastructure spreading. You used to come with a little cord and say, this is my infrastructure, but now you're seeing charging stations everywhere. You're seeing, all the compatibility issues are starting to lower. Tesla's taking on Tesla and vice versa. And
You know,
And are you still seeing things like some home power incentives trying to incentivize you to plug it in later at 10 or 11 for a different pricing than rather than just plugging in when you go home or going out, or those? Well, okay, so that's changed a bit.
Yeah, Octopus and several of them will give you free EV charging, but watch what they charge you during the day is the issue. Yeah, I mean, I think Tesla will do it free too. That they have an energy side now.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, most of us are charging at home for sure, 95%. We have a few members who are coping with public charging, and it's a struggle. Yeah.
Okay. So all of that background kind of leads to, I talked about this study 4 years ago, and this is what I want to go back to the disclaimer and talked about on work. But it talked about, if it looked at the faster adoption in a community in Italy of EVs and the benefit of the reduction in emission, but then the impact on the load. So they were looking at a model of their power demand and load as it was in 2015, and then what it would mean over the course of hours if there was 100% EV adoption at the time. And so basically that demand would have exceeded what the load capacity would have been in that community in Italy at the time.
how is ERCOT keeping up with predictions of EV? First off, I guess I'd ask the question, is the EV load a significant load on ERCOT?
So, I would say yes, they think about it, especially when we have the small reserves when it's 100 degrees out and all the demand. I know that places like Pedernales Electric Cooperative, have looked at adding sources or doing more microgrid or distributed demand and pull because they're suburban Austin. And if they have a lot of electric vehicles, people worry about what's going to stress our program. We know that I know where my girlfriend is in Kenswick and Humble, they have brownouts just with the blower to mode because they're outside the city and the county, and there's just aged infrastructure and other things. So the deficit or the need to manage what's there can become sometimes very critical in terms of how work is. And so part of that solution is, adding the more batteries or looking at how do we deliver power closer where this demand is and not. So we'll see, I think, a future of more smart grid or thinking or allowing more small to medium size generation or batteries coming into the market, because it used to be just kind of one big power plant going and feeding out everyone directly. But we do live in an age where we can add a lot of sensors and Internet of Things. And so could AI manage that? I don't know, but we have basically everyone sits in that room in ERCOT and says, okay, where do we need to direct the highways and the flow to keep everything on? And the answer is going to be a mixture of all these things that understands work and where things are demanded from real time. So these are examples of the literature papers and work. So since that time, there's a lot of thought about getting to this design and approach, and, you know, basically where we're headed to say, we'll have a better future. So there's, you know, the important thing that I'm careful here is I'm not saying here that this model says that EVs are going to crash our current infrastructure. It's just a model that says we have to think differently about how we modernize our infrastructure to keep up with all the demands that are coming on our work. And so making sure you can charge your EV when you want and that a growing community can serve all its loads are what a lot of people are thinking about right now. So this was an example of that case study, and I've talked a few times about projects at the distributed level with others that want to build more EV charging stations and do it with like its own supported renewable grid or work. But this was out of a paper out of South Korea where they're really looking at modeling or sharing these things with loads. So we have, you know, basically 4 inputs going through a converter and looking at these flows. The way they've drawn it really, I think, could be tied a little better, but we have both direct current and a grid going to an EV load station, or direct current being transferred from the battery or wind turbine, and all these feeds that are part of the design of what is going to be EV charging. So multiple inputs to be able to draw from, depending on when the load is and it's needed and where the best source is from where it's coming from. So that's where the future is, and it's a lot different than just the coal plant running or not running. This, just to share some things you're probably all familiar with. How do you find power and work? But if you aren't familiar with, you know, if you focus on apps or you're going to take a trip across Texas, I was impressed they had over 3,000 charging sites at the Texas Department of Transportation site. And so that's a resource to be aware of if you didn't know it already from what other media is out there. For other advocacy topics and work, you know, there's these, if you have a business that you operate, like the school buses you were talking about, or commercial vehicles, there's different grant programs helped to run by the state to develop and support switching things for emissions and work. So there's heavy duty vehicles here. I think that's interesting. I think as a one-person show, I don't know if I'd qualify for that size for getting my EV truck. But, you know, it's interesting to think, you know, seaport and rail yard infrastructure, all these things at a large level, the state has those programs and areas. So there's definitely people thinking about this in the application. I thought it was very interesting to find this Prairie Guardians. If you hadn't heard of it, that's worth checking out. I guess it's a lot of farm or rural communities looking at running their own electrical co-ops, just like they really do for agriculture. But if they adopt more EV vehicles or infrastructure, say for ag, like a lot of agricultural communities do, they look at electrical supply co-ops or maybe their own grids. You know, there's community solar is an interesting thing. In Texas, we don't have incentives necessarily for it, but things do happen. So it's a fun topic to see what's happening out there on grassroots. Also, then I wanted to share as a resource National Renewable Energy Labs. I just drove by them in Golden, Colorado. I was up in a meeting. I kind of want to take a tour. If I were to go back and be an electrical engineer, I think that'd be a fun place to be young and hiking and working on some of the cool stuff that's there. But if you're not already aware of what NREL does here on their roadmap for improving the infrastructure, I would encourage you to look at this site. They have what's called this EV Pro, which can look at a community or a little area and try and model and calculate how much charging a community may need for charging, depending on how many people are there. So if you're doing outreach and trying to support the building of more EV charging infrastructure, that's important. If you're going to plan a large road trip or having long, say, logistics, they have a road trip work, as well as, saying if you were to run your own rideshare business. I'm sure that's probably a little bit subsidized, but so there's a lot of things where they're trying to look at the models of saying, how will we make this all work? What does it need to look like? There's a lot of thought leadership now getting at that and doing it. So now it becomes the real hard work of the looking at those plans and, doing the hard work of the outreach and leadership and political will to make those changes, build those things, decide, is it going to be, do we need support for it to be more adopted at our local type stations? Do we need more something central? Do we need a different way to have power generated and delivered? I think we will see those changes, but it's a lot of effort and work. If you're interested in looking at the utility scale things aside, there are financial models and ways to look at, is the community solar project viable, or what could the output of a solar project be? There's community solar guidelines. So if you remember nothing else today, hopefully I've shown you can really do some work and find out some fascinating things about renewable energy opportunities in Texas from, doing it on your house. It's still one of these things, I think, if you own long-term, like if you're going to put solar on your rooftop, you're probably looking at if you're thinking return payout on building it up front versus what you get on your bill, that might be like 5 years or something. And so it's pretty similar in terms of break even at the rooftop or utility level, but it also helps with the stability and demand of power that we have long term, and addressing our needs as we change the energy model of how we do transportation. We also need to change what's going to our outlets and plugs, and that's going to be a solution involving a lot of factors. So I hope you found the presentation interesting, and that's my contact information. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask a question. Could you browse to the ERCOT website? They have a bunch of great graphs up there. At the ERCOT website, they show you what current demand and generation is, but there's some other curves that I don't quite understand, and I apologize but is there a chance you could go to the ERCOT website and explain some of those things? Huh?
Yes, I'm not, sometimes they have
yeah, scroll down and yeah, so I understand the curve on the left and the middle curve. What is
Okay.
the right one, real time? Oh, that's just the location of power plants? The Texas?
Yeah, let me move my, oops, sorry. Oh, okay.
Scroll up a little bit. Can we dim the lights a little bit, Robert?
So if I understand that heat load map and others, that's that's where there's more. I think it's a demand.
It tells you at the top. but you
Yeah, what does that say,
scroll
Houston?
down, Scroll back up, it'll tell you.
Go the other direction,
Can't go.
a little bit more.
I'm not-
Updates every, but we don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's all you need to do on yours.
Oh, okay, all right.
On that right-hand side, scroll. There you go, real-time location pricing.
Okay, so that's the pricing. So we have, so that's a good, so the pricing is a little higher. Now it's interesting, it's a little higher in far west Texas. I don't know if that's part of if that means it's a cloudy day, or what's interesting is Midland, Odessa is starting to close down their diesel generation electricity. So maybe they're drawing close to those. But where you see that large blue glut is, the lowest pricing, and that's where the wind may be very high and there's so much generation, there isn't as much demand. Now looks like, I don't know if there's a little bit of color down here in the Houston area being higher, but we have the biggest population. So what's interesting here is we have a spike. You see that gray is the net output. So for whatever reason,
That's the energy storage resources?
right. So the energy storage resource output, we have a spike right now. And so they needed the batteries. If we're at our operational reserves, they say it's normal, and I think our normal total load is like 80 to 90 gigawatts. And we're just over the hair of what's needed. The operational reserves are somewhere around that 10%. But when that gets to less than 10%, you can see that start to be yellow and concerned about where they're drawing that. Generation outages, where places aren't happening, but,
Could you move it to, we can't see the curve on the,
oh, okay. It doesn't like me, I'm sorry. So this is generation outages. And so there's been places that had to be forced out, or they were planned to be out for maintenance, and they look at that total. So they're managing how much is being generated. So if they had that peak over there, maybe those up and down curves where it's going up a little bit and going down is related to that. You have the fuel mix. You have the system-wide demand. So there's that duck curve we were talking about there in the middle, system-wide demand. Combined wind and solar. Today was a day where wind and solar followed each other's patterns. So that's great. But then if, say, wind and solar are going down at night and then the whole demand goes up, that's still part of a matching problem. And maybe that's where the batteries over here are coming in and improving things. So, and then you have the tie to the pricing. We had that peak over here where the battery demand went higher, and so the price went up when the batteries were being drawn and there was a power emergency for whatever those days or particular time was. So
so we see a spike on the curve on the right. System-wide prices?
Right. And so that price spike seems to overlap well with the battery spike. Okay. So you have, the pricing and the needs that can vary, hour by hour. Literally.
What is, yeah, go ahead.
I got a question outside of this one. The projects you work on, what size is a good size for your projects? You gave me 5 megawatts, but.
Yeah. So, yeah, a project can be viable at 1 megawatt. I like projects, so if someone had 5 acres and a great power line and a substation next to them, I'd do a megawatt project just because it's viable and work. I try to target just under 10 megawatts and like someone that has 50 acres and work. And so, I structure a success fee based on the gross percentage of the cost of a project. So, but the reality is, yeah, what a megawatt will power, 600 to 700 homes, and, have a significant impact and, be very valuable. And so like you're just seeing here, a 1 megawatt battery, if you're having, bad weather and, you need that power and you need to keep your local hospital running and your emergency services going, that type of support for those hours, you can see that, that change and a change within the demand in the local need really can go away up and down in 4 hours. So that's where having that battery to cover those short times and most of the demand issues makes a lot of sense. And so it can, make sense for a large city trying to model their growth, as well as a small town or, local farmers and co-ops that wanted to change out their equipment or just know that, you're not going to blow the 70-year-old transmitter down the road, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Now that Texas has decided to hook up to the national grid, well, how will that affect all of this? Because can't they just import electricity from the neighboring states and Mexico? And how will that change the demand and everything?
Good. So that's a good question. The ERCOT pricing model and PPAs isn't necessarily going away. So I've seen that news as well, and I'm interested in terms of how that'll impact the pricing and the demand. The ERCOT structure, we're connecting now to FERC and we're not completely isolated, and that's a good thing for, keeping away the real reserve problems we have. But how it'll affect price and infrastructure yet, I don't know. I'm paying as much attention as well. So
Well, it could be a good thing because we could export our electricity as well as import it.
yeah, I think that'd be a great thing for when we have that negative pricing and glut in wind. If we can now sell that to New Mexico or Oklahoma, or it makes sense to spread out to our neighbors. We basically we have the mega industrial region of all the petrochem complex that runs from Houston to New Orleans. So it makes sense to sell power into MISO as well, where there's a large industrial load.
Things we're taking a look at is where FERC, the problems I can see is where FERC has different rules about purchasing power. Like
personally, I have solar power on my house, and if they don't want to pay, uh, right now they're paying a utility fee, or we're paying back and forth. We're buying and selling our power through their utilities, and that they've always wanted to limit that down to what generation power plants are paying, your 3 cents, 3.5 cents. So my power would be worth pennies compared to what I was getting today. So if we go with federal rules, it depends on what they do with it, but it could be bad.
So,
Worse.
you know, at the local level, you know, if you have net metering at your house, you're dealing with still the local transmission owners and whatever contract provider you're dealing with on the marketplace that's work. So you're a little bit insulated in that, you know, if you're dealing with CenterPoint and, you know, TXU Energy or Green Mountain, they're the stadium managers and you're paying your tickets. So they're going to have certain things that you're going to be still, you know, generating that they should be buying from at a rate for what they're going at. You know, but you know, I think, you know, having do you have rooftop solar as well as a power wall or like a battery then at home as well with the grid tie? Yeah. So, and I think, you know, I think there'll continue to be incentives or ideas of, you know, you drawing on that for, you know, it's like, well, if you have that during the brownout, then hopefully that covers the stop gaps, because at the large level, you know, basically this, you know, this is not just the model for an EV load station, but for the entire market of how things will be managed. So, you know, there's in some of the papers I referenced some very detailed, you know, discrete math algorithms that look at all these different inputs and how they're managed, or different ratios or things that you pull. And then you would have those tied to the models of when the demand is and when's the best efficiency to turn things on and off most of the time. But obviously it's always kind of a moving target. But so this model is, I think, going to be in the future, not just true for EV charging stations having 4 or 5 inputs, but, you know, your own power contract, you know, will probably evolve from whether you're buying from Green Mountain or market rate from CenterPoint, to them talking about drawing on multiple power things and work. A lot of that happens anyway that you never see behind the scenes, but, you know, the thing to watch is how, you know, they practically make all of these things work and how they'll manage it. So, you know, we can draw, I see connecting to the grid as one other power source maybe we can pull from, but there'll be supply and demand and limits on, is it worth the price of pulling that versus drawing from 0.5 gigawatt of batteries all at once? So it'll be interesting to see, and you know, it'll be, you know, it's interesting to hear, you know, things getting better in terms of charging at home and dealing with issues of better batteries, and seems like less range anxiety. Just kind of curious if anyone make the Houston to Dallas trip, and like how long have you ever had an issue not making one of those charging things, or having to wait a long time for them at Buc-ee's if you wanted to use their charging, or, you know, do you end up being stuck there an hour? I mean, are range anxiety still issues for making the normal trips you do, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio?
Tomlinson, he made a trip down towards San Antonio and beyond, and he was really challenged to charge his electric vehicle.
How long ago was it? Couple of years, I think. This year.
This year.
If you plan it, you can do it.
And there's always anxiety about whether the charge stations are working, right?
Well, this is for Tesla. So, and 10 years ago, when I was going from Houston to San Antonio, there was one supercharger in between. The car could make it, but when you got there, you couldn't go anywhere. So the stopping in the middle and spending 30 minutes for a launch was, I was going to do anyway. Now there's at least 5 superchargers in between Houston and San Antonio. So you got all kinds of choices there. And I think that's happening more and more, but that's Tesla. The Electrify America ones concern me. That's they seem to have declining, but they have had problems in the past. I think they're finally repairing individual chargers that Bill's talking about. It's definitely, and now that you can Ford can now charge at Tesla, that's a big improvement for Ford. I hope so for Tesla.
Do you hear anybody forecasting vehicle to grid as a solution?
Interesting. I mean, I've just seen the commercials or ideas of, keeping your house running when there's a brownout. And you've done that in Barrel and whatever. So
With the storm.
currently, yeah. So, that's an interesting thought and source of where it is. I think the more, the key is having utilities that have incentives or at least the drive to modernize. A lot of, until the 80s or things, basically all utilities were government or quasi-government, operations that could be pretty sleepy in terms of thinking about things. There was, even when I talked to one Central Texas co-op, they were like, at the time they had their CEO was just like, yep, we got one big power supplier and that's all we need. Fortunately, that guy didn't stay more than 2 or 3 years, but there's also this mindset of changing of like, we have all these resources. How do we think about making them all work together? And, some, out there, I know that like, there are some like in the Southeast, Georgia Power and some others have shown some foresight and progressive things and learning and working with different things. But, I've out in West Texas, there was Big Country Electric Co-op around Snyder that was willing to net meter up to half a gig on people's like ranchettes, and they would pay people 6.9 cents. So, you keep your power bill down and you wouldn't make a crazy amount of money, but they were like, well, we can add to our power needs out here and we're rural and they added to it. So I've seen a variety of things where, forward thinkers are thinking about, you can add sensors, tools, and model real-time data and try and make real good decisions, but you need somebody willing to understand that, train, sit there and do it. And if you, so there's, I think, just like anything with management of change, we have early adopters, trailblazers, we have those that are never going to do anything and hopefully they'll retire anyway. And then everyone else is kind of in the middle, right? So,
Well, the reason I ask is because the question has come up, will electric cars crash the grid? Because there is potential to pull a lot of power right when the grid is vulnerable.
And so that's why I was careful and said a disclaimer. And it's like, is that potential is that potential there as a possibility? And this model said, yes, it's possible. The great thing is, we also live in an age where, everything is real time and publicly being managed, and we're actively pulling on resources like battery there in the lower left and managing work there. So,
Well,
so is it going to crash the grid tomorrow? No. But do we need the grid infrastructure to continue to change to meet our current demands? Yes. Is that happening now? Yes, but to where and what degree and how much do we need? That's all everything people are wondering about. So that's the great thing about at least having something like, well, there's a model and a tool. So if you're going to sit down with your community leaders and work and say, look, if we have 1,000, 10,000 EV drivers and we have that, here's what our load is, what it could look like. What can we do to change that? Is that to add batteries? Is that to buy power from somewhere else? If you don't make those changes and don't think about how to change it, then yeah, we can have some major grid problems. But is it going to, you asked the main critical question is, are EVs going to be a major problem? Well, if we don't do anything and we're stagnant, they could be, but we're managing our power needs just like our biggest problem versus EVs right now, I think, are the fact that when it's 100 degrees for 30 days in a row and we're all running our HVACs, that's our systems aren't designed to
so there's another question that
deal with that.
I don't hear hardly anybody asking, and that is the EV what's going to actually save the grid? And the way that you do that is through vehicle to grid connections where the power is bidirectional. Your charge that can load the grid, or with the right pricing signals, it feeds the grid. And instead of the more EVs coming on, the more of a danger there is to the grid. The more EVs coming online, the more the grid is actually stabilized, as long as they're plugged in.
Right. And so that bidirectional thing is interesting. And so that also deals with, in the future, we want to see kind of a smoothing of this demand curve as I move that up. So the less of a peak and valley we can see with all our resources that we pull from, the better that we'll deal with. But if the challenge where that demand is it's great if it's bidirectional and we have our batteries feeding that as part of our own infrastructure. But that also is the time when you're back and you're trying to draw and recharge them from being out all day. So yeah, I'm very curious to see that. And the fun thing about me coming to talk about this and others is I'm more a biology scientist type person that looks at a lot of literature, but it's fun to look at some of the published papers and the electrical engineering literature, and they keep thinking about this and modeling it and doing it. So, if you ever see, I have some adjunct appointments for the toxicology I teach. So if you ever see a paper out there that you'd have to purchase, and as long as you don't ask me for like 20 papers, if you've ever seen electrical paper or EV paper you want, give me an email. As now a club member, I'll go pull a study for you and save you some money. You bet.
Yes. When Dave and I were doing the radio show at KPFT, the host was talking a lot about disruption, Tony Seba, Mr. Disruption himself. And isn't all this kind of passe? Because if everybody has solar on their rooftops, they don't need to go to this large centralized, I don't want to call it monopolies, but then maybe government monopolies or energy cartels.
So, the whole idea of microgrids or doing more distributed is going away from the straight A to B model for power. What'll be really interesting in disruption, and say if California meets their total renewable goals at work, is how do you maintain that balance of, ideally, if you timed it well, you have solar during the day, wind during the night, and a battery to keep the gaps in between. Maybe your hydro, geothermal, or all this. But basically, everyone is trying to say that, in theory, these multiple inputs or models can work, but this is the theory, and we're still trying to say, how do we make it in practice? And all you have to do is look at those changes on the ERCOT dashboard every day to say, this is very dynamic. It's hard. It's like, it's trying to predict futures and work. And that's, it's a form of risk and gambling and issues. And, the main thing, doesn't necessarily matter whether it's renewable or not. The people at ERCOT know their job is to keep the lights on, because when they don't, when Winter Storm Uri happened, they just fired everyone on the ERCOT board and the president. And, it wasn't necessarily their fault, but that's part of being in political stage and others. And then, having, you piss off a lot of wealthy people that don't have power for a certain amount of time. There's going to be things that happen. Doesn't matter if it was a major cataclysmic event or not. It's just like they got to keep it on. So, good questions. Great crowd.
One
Yes.
last question. Is a possible road trip in order to go to see some of these solar farms?
Sure. I'd love to do that. In the future, there may still be access or close access to one of the projects I helped sell and put together. Let me talk to one of my partners about that. There's a local guy who used to do things with leisure. And is Leisure Learning still around? You remember? Did they crash? Yeah. There used to be there's a guy out in Sealy, Texas, that would do goat farming and was an early PV adopter. And he used to do tours, something out there. But I'll look at opportunities, or hopefully, as my own projects keep going, I'd love to bring the club out to one. Or one of the landowners I had was focused on EV charging as well. But I think in the future, we'll kind of understand what makes, besides EV charging at home, maybe more club people or others, it can be a very, the future of running an EV charging station. We have a demand for it. It should be a viable kind of business approach and things. So that might be something of interest to members as well. And I know that there are developers out there, besides building renewable projects, looking at building more EV infrastructure. So I'll keep my mind in that, but please keep me on your regular email list, and I want to become more involved. And hopefully you can help me if you see a good deal on an EV truck in the next couple of years. Help set me up. All right. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Did you get any questions from the cyberspace?
No, I don't see any. One, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Benjamin. Appreciate it. Guess he's gone, but all right.
Why don't we do that? Yeah. Float it out and yeah. Maybe throw out some ideas and submit it to the 4 people, and then we can submit it via the Facebook. All right, well, that about covers it. I guess we answered all the questions we had at the moment, but
Hang on, I got a little, Kevin sent me something I want to share, or he wants to share. Oh, thank you. Yeah, give me a minute. Yeah. So yeah, Kevin and his wife were in Niagara, and he sent a couple of videos related. If I can, that's the mist of the and the made yeah, made of the mist, something like that. Hang on a second. Ah, pardon me. So this is an electric boat. So he wants to show you the power that it has in staying in one place. That's one thing. And then the other thing he wants to show is
several flybys. The Lancaster bomber didn't come back. Look.
not that one.
Niagara Falls and all its surroundings.
This glider, electric glider, that it takes off on its own power, and then the propeller pulls in and it's all gliding. Wow. Yeah, he's really big into EVs, and so the next thing is electric aircraft and now watercraft.
Please visit us again here on the Made of the Mist.
He wants to show the charging.
That's where they plug it in? 7 minutes to charge. And you corrected by a heavy CCS cable.
Yeah, I don't drive. Right, bike?
Set it on the back. That's how they plug it in, 7 minutes they charge.
7 minutes.
I'm sure. Can't even hear it.
Okay, one more. Also, he wanted to show
Several
snowbirds.
Lancaster bomber didn't come back.
The snowbirds are the Canadian Air Force's aerodynamic or aero team, I guess. This is for 9/11. Okay, thank you, Kevin. All right, back to you, Robert. You want to call it? All right. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you next time.